Steve Harvey breaks down when 67-year-old contestant reveals he saved his life. Then tragedy strikes. Nobody in that studio knew they were about to witness something that would stop America in its tracks. Not the audience, not the cameras, not the producers watching from behind their glass monitors, and certainly not Steve Harvey, who stood at center stage that Wednesday afternoon in his signature burgundy suit, microphone in hand, grinning his famous grin, completely unaware that the man standing 60 feet away from him had once pulled him from the edge of death. This is the story of Earl Washington, a 67-year-old retired firefighter from Birmingham, Alabama. A man who had spent 41 years running into burning buildings so that other people could walk out. A man who asked for nothing in return. A man who carried one secret so quietly, so carefully, for so long, that even his own family didn't know the full truth. Until the day he stood on the Family Feud stage. Until the day he looked Steve Harvey in the eyes. And everything changed. Stay with me, because this story does not end the way you think it does. To understand what happened that day, you have to understand who Earl Washington was. He was born in 1957 in Birmingham, Alabama, the youngest of 6 children raised by a single mother who cleaned houses 6 days a week and went to church on the 7th. They didn't have much, but Earl would tell you they had everything that mattered. He joined the Birmingham Fire Department at 26 years old, not because it was glamorous, not because of the uniform. He joined because his neighbor's house caught fire when he was 9 years old, and he watched a firefighter carry a little girl out through the smoke, set her down on the grass, and then go back in for more. Earl never forgot that image. He never forgot the way that firefighter didn't hesitate. He spent 41 years trying to be that man. By the time he retired in 2019, Earl Washington had been cited for bravery 14 times. He had rescued 31 people from fires, 2 from car accidents, and one very specific person, from a situation that never made the official reports. We'll get to that. What his colleagues remembered most about Earl wasn't the citations. It was the way he showed up, not just to fires, to funerals, to hospital rooms, to the birthday parties of kids whose families he'd helped a decade earlier. Earl Washington believed that saving someone's life didn't end the moment you carried them out of the building. He believed it was a relationship, a responsibility. His wife of 38 years, Gloria, used to say, "Earl doesn't just save people. He adopts them." She said it with love. She said it right up until the day she got sick. In the spring of 2024, Earl Washington's granddaughter, Destiny, 22 years old, full of fire, studying communications at Alabama A&M, submitted a Family Feud application on behalf of their family. She did it as a surprise. She thought it would cheer her grandfather up. Because Earl needed cheering up. Gloria Washington had been diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer 8 months earlier. She had never smoked a day in her life. That's the thing about cancer, it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how good a person you are, or how many people you've saved, or how many years you have left to give. The treatment was aggressive. The prognosis was uncertain. And Earl, this man who had walked through fire without flinching, sat beside his wife's hospital bed every single night and held her hand and quietly fell apart. Destiny knew her grandfather needed something to look forward to. She also knew he had a secret he'd been carrying for years. Something he'd mentioned once, carefully, in passing, and then never again. So she sent in the application. She included one line in the "Why should your family be on Family Feud?" section that she would later say she almost deleted. She wrote, "My grandfather once saved a life that neither of us talk about. I think it's time the world knows." The casting team called them 3 weeks later. The Washington family arrived at the Family Feud studio on a Wednesday morning in September. Earl, Destiny, his son Marcus, 44, his daughter-in-law Priya, and his youngest grandson, 8-year-old James, who spent the entire pre-show briefing asking every producer he could find whether Steve Harvey was actually tall in real life. He is, for the record. James was delighted. Gloria was not there. She was in the middle of her 4th round of chemotherapy. She had made Earl promise, made him swear on 43 years of marriage, that he would go, that he would smile, that he would have fun. "Go win us some money, old man," she had told him from her hospital bed that morning. "And if you see Steve Harvey, you tell him." She stopped, smiled. "Tell him what?" Earl had asked. "Nothing," she said. "You'll know when the moment comes." Earl held that like a puzzle piece he didn't yet have the board for. The game began at 2 in the afternoon, and for the first 40 minutes, it was exactly what you'd expect from Family Feud. Laughter, friendly competition, Steve working the room like only Steve Harvey can. Quick with the jokes, quicker with the heart. The Washington family was warm and sharp. Destiny was magnetic on camera. Little James stole every cutaway shot. Earl played quietly, thoughtfully. He wasn't the loudest person on his team, but when he answered correctly. Every single time. There was something about the way he moved through the game that made the producers in the booth lean forward slightly. Something behind his eyes that suggested this man was building towards something. They were right. The Washington family won the main game by 11 points. As the confetti fell and the audience cheered, Steve Harvey crossed the stage to shake Earl's hand. And that's when it happened. That's when Earl didn't let go. Steve Harvey has a way of reading a room that most people never develop. It's why he's been in front of cameras for 30 years. He can feel when something is shifting, when the energy in a space changes from performance to truth. He felt it the moment Earl Washington held his hand. "Mr. Washington," Steve said, his smile still in place, but his eyes suddenly careful. "You all right?" Earl looked at him, really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you've been waiting a long time to see their face. "Mr. Harvey," Earl said, his voice low and steady. "Before we do fast money, I need to tell you something. And I need you to know, I'm not doing this for TV. I'm doing this because my wife told me the moment would come. And this is it." Steve nodded slowly. He lowered his microphone. He said, quietly, "Go ahead, sir." The audience hushed. March 14th, 2003, Earl began. It was a Saturday night. You were in Birmingham, Alabama, performing at the BJCC. You probably don't remember this. But after your show, there was a fire in the parking structure connected to the venue. Electrical fault in the lower level. It spread fast, faster than anyone expected. Steve Harvey went very still. Most people had already left, Earl continued. But there was one car still in the lower level. A black SUV. The driver had gone back inside to retrieve something he'd left, and by the time he came out, the exits were blocked. He was trapped between two burning vehicles. Smoke was dropping fast. Earl paused. His jaw tightened. My unit was second on scene. I went in without waiting for clearance because I could hear him. He was coughing. He was calling out. It was dark and the smoke was so thick I couldn't see my own hand, but I followed the sound of his voice until I found him. The studio was completely silent. I carried him out. He was unconscious by the time we reached fresh air. The paramedics took him. I went back in for a secondary sweep. By the time I came back out, he was already in an ambulance. I never got his name. I never saw his face clearly. We never spoke. Earl looked at Steve Harvey, but I always remembered the jacket he was wearing. A very specific jacket. Black, with a red lining. The letters SH stitched on the inside collar. I saw it for 1 second when I was carrying him. I never forgot it. Steve Harvey's microphone slowly dropped to his side. "That was your jacket, Mr. Harvey. That was you." For 7 seconds. 7 full seconds that every person in that studio counted without realizing they were counting. Steve Harvey said nothing. Then, very quietly, "The concert in Birmingham." Earl nodded. "I've thought about that night," Steve said slowly. "I've thought about it many times. The fire. Waking up outside. Not knowing how I got there." He stopped. I asked. "Nobody could tell me who carried me out." "It was me," Earl said simply. And Steve Harvey, who has laughed on this stage, who has danced on this stage, who has cried on this stage more times than he can count, sat down on the stage floor. Not dramatically, not for the cameras. He just sat down, like the weight of what he'd just learned required him to be closer to the ground. The audience didn't make a sound. Destiny Washington was crying. Marcus had his hand over his mouth. Little James didn't fully understand what was happening, but he understood that his grandfather had done something enormous. He slipped his small hand into Earl's. Earl looked down at his grandson, and for the first time since he'd stepped on that stage, he smiled. Steve Harvey got back to his feet. He walked to Earl Washington. He didn't say anything. He wrapped both arms around the 67-year-old retired firefighter, this quiet man from Birmingham who had saved 31 lives and never asked for anything, and he held on. The audience came apart. What happened next is what separates this story from every other emotional moment on television. Because just when you thought the tears were done, Just when the audience was catching its breath and reaching for whatever was left of their composure, Steve Harvey pulled back from the hug and looked at Earl carefully. "Where's Gloria?" Steve asked. "Your wife?" The application said. Earl's smile shifted. "Just slightly. Just enough. She's at UAB Medical Center," Earl said. "Chemotherapy. Round 4. Steve's expression changed. "Is she? She wanted me to come?" Earl said quickly. "She insisted." "She said," his voice caught for the first time. "She said go have fun. Win us some money." Steve Harvey looked at his producers. Something passed between them. Fast, decisive. "We're taking a break," Steve announced to the studio. He turned back to Earl. 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, a production assistant handed Steve Harvey a phone. Steve made one call. He stepped away from the cameras. Nobody heard what he said. When Steve came back, he crouched down in front of little James and said, "Hey, buddy, does your grandma like surprises?" James considered this with the full seriousness of an 8-year-old facing an important question. "She likes good ones," he said finally. Steve Harvey laughed. The real laugh, the one that starts in his chest. "That's the right answer, young man." He stood up. He looked at Earl. "We're going to finish this game," Steve said. "And then, Earl, I need you to call your wife. Because I have something I want to say to her. If that's all right with you." Earl looked at this man whose life he had saved 21 years ago without asking for a single thing in return, and nodded. "That's all right with me," he said. The fast money round was played. Destiny went first and scored 147 points. Sharp, fast, laughing through her tears, exactly the kind of person her grandfather raised her to be. Then Earl stepped up to the podium. Steve leaned in and said, "Off mic, just loud enough for the front rows to catch it. No pressure. You already did the hardest thing today." Earl's answer, "Speak for yourself." The audience loved him. Earl scored 168 points. One of the highest individual fast money scores in the show's history. The Washington family won $25,000. But nobody in that studio was thinking about the money. Because when the confetti settled and the cheering faded, Steve Harvey took out his personal phone, not a show prop, his actual phone, and walked to Earl. "Call her," Steve said. Earl dialed. It rang twice. Gloria Washington answered on the second ring, the way she always did. "Earl Washington," she said, her voice thin from treatment, but warm in the way that 43 years of love makes a voice warm. "Did you win?" "We won," Earl said. "I knew it." "How much?" $25,000, Gloria. A pause. Then, "Lord have mercy." The audience laughed softly. "Baby," Earl said, "there's someone who wants to talk to you." He held the phone toward Steve Harvey. Steve took it carefully, like it was something fragile, which it was. "Mrs. Washington," Steve said. "My name is Steve Harvey." Silence on the line. Then Gloria Washington said, and this was broadcast, this was live, this was heard by everyone in that studio, and eventually by millions of people watching at home. "I know who you are, baby. Earl told me about you a long time ago. He just didn't know your name yet." Steve Harvey pressed his hand over his eyes. "I want to thank you," he said, "for your husband, for what he did, for the kind of man you helped him be." Another pause. When Gloria spoke again, her voice was softer. "Mr. Harvey, you thank him by living well. That's all he ever wanted. That's all any of us want." Steve couldn't speak for a moment. "Yes, ma'am," he finally managed. "Now give the phone back to my husband," Gloria said gently, "and tell him to bring me some decent food from wherever y'all are. Hospital food is a disgrace." The studio erupted. The episode aired 6 weeks later. It became the most watched Family Feud episode in the history of the show. Clips of Earl's revelation, of Steve sitting down on the stage floor, of the phone call with Gloria, they traveled around the world in hours. Hundreds of millions of views. Thousands of messages pouring into the network, into the fire department, into the Washington family's lives. People wrote letters to Earl. Real letters, on paper, mailed to the Birmingham Fire Department with nothing but his name and Birmingham, Alabama, on the envelope. They all arrived. Steve Harvey dedicated an entire episode of his radio show to Earl. He called him the truest definition of a hero I have ever personally encountered. He said it without the jokes, without the performance. Just said it, clearly, into the microphone, and let it sit. The $25,000 went toward Gloria's medical expenses. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, not because of the money, but because Stage 3 had quietly become Stage 4 somewhere between the filming date and the air date. The cancer had moved. Gloria Washington died on a Tuesday morning in December, 11 weeks after the episode aired. She was surrounded by Earl, Marcus, Destiny, little James, and 3 of her closest friends from church. Destiny later said that in her last coherent days, Gloria had watched the Family Feud episode 4 times. Not for the game, not for the confetti or the fast money scores. For the phone call. She watched herself, her own voice, her own words, broadcast into millions of living rooms, and she smiled every time. She said it was the only time in her life she'd been on television. Destiny told a reporter afterward. She said she looked good. Earl Washington did not speak publicly for 3 months after Gloria died. When he did, in a short, quiet interview on a local Birmingham radio station, he said only this: "People keep calling me a hero. I don't know about that. I just did what I was trained to do. I went toward the fire. That's the job." A pause. Gloria was the hero. She kept the fire going at home for 43 years. That's harder. That takes more courage than anything I ever did in a burning building. Another pause. I just wish I'd told her that more. While I had the time. Earl Washington still lives in Birmingham, Alabama. He volunteers at the fire station on Tuesdays. He picks up little James from school on Thursdays. He goes to church on Sundays, the same church Gloria went to for 40 years, and he sits in the same pew they always shared, and he leaves one seat empty beside him. Steve Harvey has called him 4 times since the episode aired. Not for cameras, not for follow-up content, just to talk, just to check in. Because some things, once they begin, don't stop. Some connections, once made, don't break. Earl Washington ran into burning buildings for 41 years so that other people could keep living their lives. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He did it because a 9-year-old boy in Birmingham once watched a man not hesitate and decided, right then, that when the moment came, he wouldn't hesitate either. The moment came, and he didn't. And somewhere between a smoke-filled parking garage in 2003 and a television studio in 2024, between a man who was saved and a man who did the saving, something was completed. Something that had been waiting, quietly, patiently, for 21 years to close. It closed on a Wednesday afternoon, in a studio full of people who came for a game show and left with something they couldn't name. It closed in the voice of a woman calling in from a hospital room, thin and tired and utterly undefeated. It closed when an 8-year-old boy slipped his hand into his grandfather's and didn't let go. Rest in peace, Gloria Washington. And thank you, Earl. Thank you for not hesitating. Asterisk if this story moved you, share it. Because somewhere out there is someone who runs toward the fire every single day, and they need to know that the world sees them. Asterisk. Asterisk subscribe for more stories that remind us what human beings are capable of at their very best and in their hardest moments.